Introduction. June 6, 1944. English Channel, 23 kilometers off the French coast. Salt spray crashed over the bow of landing craft Tank 2273 as Lieutenant Dean Rockwell gripped the radio handset. Through the pre-dawn darkness, he could make out the silhouettes of 32 amphibious Sherman tanks, their canvas screens erected like medieval siege towers against the horizon. Message from Task Force. H-hour confirmed, 0630 hours. Beach obstacles identified. Heavy fortifications intact. Captain Ned Elder of the 743rd Tank Battalion studied the 5-foot swells through his binoculars and made a decision that would save hundreds of American lives. The DD tanks would not swim. They would ride their landing craft all the way to the beach. What none of them knew was that this single decision, made in the churning waters of Normandy, would trigger the most devastating armored breakthrough in the European theater. The German advantage. The hedgerows of France had taught German forces that their Tigers and Panthers were apex predators. Superior armor. Devastating 88mm guns. Mechanical precision that made them nearly invincible in defensive positions. The Wehrmacht's armored doctrine had established kill zones across the Norman countryside. Hundreds of concealed positions. Anti-tank guns sighted on every approach. Tank traps and obstacles that would channel Allied armor into predetermined killing fields. The Sherman tank churned through the English Channel at 4 knots, its Chrysler A57 multibank engine straining against 33 tons of steel and determination. Each M4A4 Sherman displaced enough water to flood a small building when fitted with its duplex drive system. Staff Sergeant Paul Reagan stood in the commander's hatch of his tank aboard LCT 600, studying the tactical situation. His tank carried 90 rounds of 75mm ammunition, 4,750 rounds of .30 caliber machine gun ammunition, and the hopes of the entire amphibious assault. American industrial philosophy. The Sherman represented American industrial philosophy at its most pragmatic. Unlike German Tigers that cost 250,000 Reichsmarks and required specialized maintenance, the Sherman could be mass-produced, shipped across oceans, and maintained by farm boys from Kansas using basic tools. Chrysler's Detroit tank arsenal alone was producing over 400 Shermans per month by 1944. The mathematics were compelling. While Germany struggled to produce 100 Tigers monthly, American factories churned out over 2,000 Shermans per month at peak production. Factor in mechanical reliability, fuel consumption, and ease of repair, and the equation became overwhelming. Tank Commander William Voitsberger had trained with the 743rd Tank Battalion at Camp Laguna, Arizona. A veteran who would later earn a Silver Star and Purple Heart, Voitsberger understood that victory in mechanized warfare wasn't just about armor thickness or gun caliber. It was about putting steel on target, maintaining operational tempo, and most critically, adapting to battlefield conditions faster than the enemy could react. The German perspective. Aboard Panther No. 424 of the 2nd Panzer Division, Unteroffizier Klaus Weber reviewed his ammunition loadout. 79 rounds for the long-barreled 75mm KWK-42 gun. 4,200 rounds of machine gun ammunition. His Panther's frontal armor measured 100mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees for an effective thickness of 140mm. The American 75mm guns couldn't penetrate it beyond 100 meters. Weber's tank displaced 45 tons, powered by a Maybach HL-230P30 engine that consumed fuel at rates that would have horrified American logistics officers. The Panther achieved 1 mile per gallon on roads, half that cross-country. But positioned hull down in a Norman hedgerow with interlocking fields of fire, the Panther didn't need to move. It only needed to kill. The German defensive positions at Omaha Beach represented 2 years of fortification work. Widerstandsnest 62, overlooking Easy Red Sector, contained multiple machine gun positions, a 50mm anti-tank gun, and mortar pits. Heinrich Severloh, manning an MG-42 machine gun, would later claim to have fired over 12,000 rounds, a figure historians consider greatly exaggerated given physical impossibility and total casualty figures. The kill zones were mathematically perfect. Overlapping fields of fire created no dead space where attackers could find cover. Pre-registered artillery coordinates meant mortars could drop shells anywhere on the beach within 30 seconds of target identification. The critical decision. At 0550 hours on June 6, Captain Elder aboard LCT 2037 observed the sea state through spray-soaked binoculars. Waves measured 5 to 6 feet. Wind force 18 knots from the west. The DD tank's canvas screens, designed for 3-foot seas, would collapse in these conditions. Of the 64 Sherman DD tanks scheduled to swim ashore at Omaha Beach, only 29 would attempt it. And of those 29, belonging to the 741st Tank Battalion on the eastern sectors, 27 would sink in the cold waters of the English Channel. But Elder's 743rd Tank Battalion would not launch. His 32 DD tanks, plus support vehicles, would ride their LCTs directly onto Dog Green and Dog Red beaches. It meant exposing the thin-skinned landing craft to direct fire, but the alternative was watching his tanks disappear beneath the waves. The mathematics of the decision were stark: risk the landing craft and their naval crews, or lose the tanks and their army crews before they fired a shot. The bombardment. At 0615 hours, the naval bombardment commenced. USS Texas fired 14-inch shells at the bluffs above Omaha. USS Arkansas added 12-inch rounds. Smaller destroyers crept within 1,000 yards of the beach, firing directly at visible fortifications. The bombardment was supposed to last 40 minutes, pulverizing German positions before the first wave hit the beach. In reality, most shells overshot their targets. Low clouds forced heavy bombers to release late, their payloads falling harmlessly in fields behind the beach. Of 446 B-24 Liberators that attacked Omaha Beach, not one bomb fell on the beach itself. First combat. The Sherman's first combat action at Omaha came at 0629 hours, 1 minute before H hour. Company A, 743rd Tank Battalion, fitted with deep-wading equipment, rolled directly off their LCTs into 4 feet of water. These tanks had been waterproofed with special kits, their exhausts extended with improvised stacks that allowed them to wade through 6 feet of water. The first tanks hit the beach with tracks grinding against the shingle as 75mm guns swung toward the bluffs. The initial German response was devastating. An 88mm anti-tank gun in WN-61 fired 8 rounds in 90 seconds. 3 Shermans exploded, their 75mm ammunition cooking off in spectacular fireballs that could be seen from naval vessels offshore. Machine gun fire sparked off tank hulls like hellish rain. Mortars walked their way across the beach, bracketing tanks with methodical precision. But the Shermans kept coming. By 0700 hours, 40 tanks were on Omaha Beach. Some were already burning. Others threw tracks on the obstacles or bogged in the shingle. But those still operational began engaging German positions with direct fire. The psychological impact was immediate. German infantry, trained to expect an infantry assault, found themselves facing armor that could absorb machine gun fire and respond with high-explosive shells. Individual tank battles. Technical Sergeant John Drogan of the 743rd Tank Battalion had landed in the second wave at 0640 hours. His tank immediately took 2 hits from a 50mm anti-tank gun, both rounds penetrating the hull but missing critical components. Drogan's driver, Private First Class Howard Freeberg, drove directly at the German position while the gunner pumped 5 rounds of high explosive into the fortification. The anti-tank gun fell silent. This became the pattern. Individual tank commanders, unable to communicate by radio, saltwater had destroyed most sets, fought private wars against specific German positions. A Sherman would absorb multiple hits from smaller caliber weapons while methodically destroying machine gun nests with its 75mm gun and bow-mounted .30 caliber machine gun. The bow gunner position, unique to American tanks, proved invaluable for suppressing German infantry while the main gun engaged hardened positions. The crisis point. By 0730 hours, the crisis at Omaha Beach was evident to naval observers. General Omar Bradley, watching from USS Augusta, considered diverting follow-up waves to Utah Beach. The 16th Infantry Regiment had taken catastrophic casualties. Company A had ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Company E was down to 23 men from 180. The beach was littered with destroyed equipment and wounded men seeking cover behind German obstacles. But the tanks were making a difference. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Skaggs, commanding the 743rd Tank Battalion's Company C, directed his tanks to engage the fortifications at Lomulin Draw. Using a technique developed in training, tanks would fire white phosphorus rounds to mark targets, then follow with high explosive. The white phosphorus had an additional effect. Its burning particles penetrated vision slits and gun ports, forcing defenders to abandon their positions. At 0815 hours, Widerstandsnist 66 reported to German Sector Command, enemy tanks on beach. Infantry decimated but tanks advancing. Request immediate anti-tank support. The response was sobering. No mobile reserves were available. The 352nd Infantry Division's anti-tank battalion was positioned 10 miles inland, held back by Field Marshal Rommel's orders to defend against expected airborne landings. The beach defenders would have to hold with what they had. Mechanical superiority through simplicity. The Sherman's mechanical simplicity now proved decisive. Tank Barber of Company B, 743rd Tank Battalion, commanded by Sergeant Walter Belcher, took 7 hits from various weapons in the first hour. The tank lost 2 bogie wheels, had its turret traverse mechanism damaged, and suffered a fuel leak. But the crew made field repairs using basic tools and spare parts carried on the tank. By 0900 hours, Barber was back in action, engaging German positions at Vierville Draw. This was the Sherman's great advantage. A damaged Tiger or Panther required specialized recovery vehicles and trained mechanics. A Sherman could be repaired by its crew using parts cannibalized from knocked-out tanks. Throughout D-Day, Sherman crews performed miracles of field maintenance. Tracks were replaced under fire. Gun barrels damaged by shell hits were swapped in 20 minutes. Engines that should have required depot-level maintenance were coaxed back to life with improvisation and determination. First German armor. At 0845 hours, the first German armor appeared. 2 Stu G3 assault guns from the 352nd Infantry Division's Assault Gun Battalion engaged Shermans at 800 meters. Their 75mm Stu K-40 guns could penetrate Sherman armor at that range. But the American tanks had a crucial advantage: numbers. For every German assault gun, there were 5 Shermans. The Stu GS managed to destroy 2 Shermans before being overwhelmed by concentrated fire from multiple tanks. By 0900 hours, combat engineers supported by tanks had blown gaps in the seawall at Easy Red Sector. Shermans began moving off the beach, engaging German positions from the flank. This was the breakthrough moment. German defensive doctrine depended on keeping attackers pinned on the beach. Once armor penetrated inland, the entire defensive system began to unravel. The DD tank survivors. Private First Class Charles Lombardi of the 741st Tank Battalion had survived the swim to shore in one of only 2 DD tanks that made it. His tank, waterlogged and barely functional, managed to engage and destroy a concrete bunker at 100 meters with 5 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition followed by high explosive. The bunker had been holding up the advance of an entire infantry company. With its destruction, 150 infantrymen were able to move off the beach. Infantry-tank cooperation. The German response to the armored breakthrough followed established doctrine. Panzerfaust teams were deployed to establish close-range ambushes. The Panzerfaust, a single-shot anti-tank weapon, could penetrate 200 millimeters of armor at 30 meters. In the Bocage country behind Omaha Beach, every hedgerow could conceal a Panzerfaust team. But the Americans had learned from disasters at Kasserine Pass and Sicily. Infantry-tank cooperation had been drilled relentlessly. Every Sherman advancing inland had infantry walking alongside, checking hedgerows and buildings for anti-tank teams. Tigers and Panthers arrive. In the days following D-Day, German armor would arrive in force. Panthers from the 2nd Panzer Division and Tigers from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion would engage American tanks near Caen and Villers-Bocage. The pattern of these engagements would prove consistent. German tanks were individually superior, but American tactics emphasized fire and maneuver. While one Sherman platoon engaged frontally, another would maneuver for flank shots. The mathematics were brutal but effective. Trading 3 Shermans for 1 Panther was considered acceptable when America was producing 30 Shermans for every Panther Germany built. Securing the beach. By noon on D-Day, 51 Sherman tanks were operational on Omaha Beach and its immediate inland areas. They had suffered terrible losses, 40% knocked out or disabled, but they had achieved their mission. The beach was secured. Follow-up waves were landing without catastrophic casualties. Most critically, the psychological impact on German forces was decisive. The myth of the impregnable Atlantic Wall defenses had been shattered. At German 352nd Infantry Division headquarters, General Dietrich Kreis received fragmentary reports throughout the morning, American tanks overwhelming beach defenses. Widerstandsnests fallen. Enemy armor advancing on Colleville. By 1300 hours, Kreis understood that Omaha Beach was lost. Without armor reserves to counter the American tanks, his infantry could only conduct a fighting withdrawal. Beyond direct combat. The Sherman's impact extended beyond direct combat. Their presence allowed engineers to clear obstacles without being massacred by machine gun fire. Their 75mm guns could engage fortifications that naval gunfire couldn't reach. Most importantly, their psychological effect on American infantry was transformative. Soldiers who had been paralyzed on the beach began advancing once they saw tanks moving forward. Technical innovations. Technical innovations implemented for D-Day proved their worth. The deep-wading equipment developed in secrecy and tested in Scotland allowed tanks to land in deeper water and avoid the worst obstacle belts. Waterproofed ammunition storage prevented catastrophic explosions when tanks were hit. Most importantly, the addition of armored telephones on tank rear decks allowed infantry to communicate with tank crews despite the loss of radios. The hedgerow problem. By 1400 hours on D-Day, American tanks were pushing inland toward their objectives. The advance was slower than planned. Hedgerows that looked like simple field boundaries on aerial photos proved to be formidable obstacles. These ancient earthen walls, some dating to Roman times, were 3 to 4 feet thick at the base, topped with dense hedges, and fronted by drainage ditches. Tanks attempting to climb over exposed their thin belly armor to anti-tank fire. But American ingenuity was already at work. Sergeant Curtis Cullen of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron had noticed that German beach obstacles, steel hedgehogs designed to rip landing craft hulls, could be cut up and welded to tank bows as hedgerow cutting devices. Within hours of landing, maintenance crews were modifying tanks with these improvised hedgerow cutters. A soldier from Tennessee named Roberts had suggested the idea, why don't we get some saw teeth and put them on the front of the tank and cut through these hedges? Cullen had recognized the brilliance in this simple observation. German High Command confusion. The German High Command's response to the Normandy landings was hampered by confusion and Hitler's personal intervention. The Führer, convinced that Normandy was a feint and the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, refused to release the strategic armor reserve. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, 130 miles from Normandy, wasn't released until late afternoon. By the time they arrived, American armor had established blocking positions on all major approaches to the beachhead. The first Tiger engagement. At 1,600 hours on D-Day, Company B, 743rd Tank Battalion, encountered its first Tiger near Formigny. The Tiger, from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, had been dispatched from its position near Caen to halt the American advance. Tank Commander SS Untersturmführer Wilhelm Müller was a veteran of Kursk, where his Tiger had destroyed 19 Soviet T-34s. His 88mm gun could penetrate a Sherman at 2,000 meters. The engagement demonstrated the tactical evolution American tankers had undergone. Instead of engaging the Tiger head-on, the Sherman platoon leader, Lieutenant James Johnson, ordered smoke rounds fired to obscure the Tiger's vision. While one Sherman maintained suppressing fire, 3 others maneuvered through a small orchard. The Tiger, focused on the lone Sherman firing at its frontal armor, didn't notice the flanking movement until too late. At 200 meters, Sherman gunners put 5 rounds into the Tiger's engine compartment. The massive tank shuddered to a halt, smoke pouring from its rear deck. Muller's crew abandoned their burning Tiger. The psychological impact rippled through German forces. If Tigers could be destroyed by Shermans, what chance did infantry have? D-Day Summary. By 1800 hours on D-Day, the 743rd and 741st Tank Battalions had established a continuous line inland from Omaha Beach. They had lost 48 tanks destroyed or disabled, with 45 crew killed and 60 wounded. But they had put 58 operational tanks ashore and broken the Atlantic Wall. German casualties were harder to quantify, but included multiple fortified positions destroyed, 3 assault guns knocked out, 1 Tiger and 3 Panthers destroyed, and hundreds of infantry casualties. Technological lessons. The technological lessons were immediately apparent. The Sherman's 75mm gun, while unable to penetrate heavy German armor frontally, was devastatingly effective against fortifications and infantry. The tank's reliability under combat conditions exceeded expectations. Despite saltwater immersion, beach obstacles, and intense combat, 70% of Shermans that made it ashore were still operational at day's end. In contrast, of 6 Tiger IIs deployed to Normandy in July, 5 would break down before reaching combat. The Rhino device. On the night of June 6 to 7, American maintenance crews worked through the darkness. Using acetylene torches to cut up German beach obstacles, they welded crude but effective hedgerow cutters to Sherman bows. By dawn on June 7, 15 tanks had been modified. Within a week, 60% of American tanks in Normandy would carry these Rhino devices, named because the prongs resembled rhinoceros horns. The German 352nd Infantry Division's War Diary for June 7 recorded, enemy tank attacks supported by massive artillery have made defensive positions untenable. Withdrawal to 2nd Defensive Line authorized. This represented a fundamental shift in German defensive doctrine. The Atlantic Wall hadn't just been breached, it had been rendered obsolete by American armor. Bradley's assessment. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commander of 1st Army, would later write, "The tanks saved Omaha Beach. Without them, we would have been thrown back into the sea." This wasn't hyperbole. The 29 infantry companies that assaulted Omaha Beach suffered 50% casualties. But the 2 tank battalions, despite heavy losses, maintained offensive capability throughout the day. Their presence turned potential disaster into costly victory. Operation Cobra. The weeks following D-Day would see the full development of American armored doctrine. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25, would showcase American combined arms tactics. 3,000 aircraft would carpet-bomb German positions. 700 Shermans, 60% equipped with Rhino hedgerow cutters, would punch through the bocage. The breakthrough would transform the Normandy stalemate into a war of movement that American armor was designed to fight. Sergeant Cullen's hedgerow cutter would become standard equipment. Within 6 weeks of D-Day, 500 Shermans would be modified with various hedgerow cutting devices. The British would develop their own version called prongs. The innovation spread so rapidly that German intelligence reported in August, all enemy tanks now equipped with hedge-breaking devices. Bocage defensive positions no longer tenable. The mathematics of attrition. The Panther tank remained technically superior throughout the campaign. Its long 75mm gun could penetrate Sherman armor at ranges where the Sherman's gun was ineffective. But technical superiority couldn't overcome numerical inferiority, logistical constraints, and mechanical unreliability. A study by the British Operational Research Section found that in Normandy, Panthers had only 37% operational availability compared to 70% for Shermans. The mathematics of attrition were inexorable. Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panthers throughout the entire war. America produced 49,234 Shermans, with nearly 50,000 total when including all variants. In Normandy alone, over 2,000 Shermans would see combat. Even achieving a 3-to-1 kill ratio, which German tanks rarely managed, couldn't stem the tide. For every Panther destroyed, 5 Shermans appeared. For every Tiger lost, 10 Shermans rolled off ships at Normandy's artificial mulberry harbors. German armor destroyed. By August 1944, German armor forces in Normandy were effectively destroyed. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had entered combat with 180 tanks, was reduced to 25. The 116th Panzer Division went from 120 tanks to 15. The vaunted 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard Adolf Hitler could muster only 17 operational tanks from an initial strength of 150. The Falaise Pocket in mid-August would see the final destruction of German armor in Normandy. Caught between British, Canadian, Polish, and American forces, German tank crews abandoned their vehicles and fled on foot. Allied pilots reported roads littered with burning Tigers and Panthers, their crews unable to maintain or fuel these mechanical monsters during the retreat. American losses and replacement. American losses were also severe. The 743rd Tank Battalion alone would lose 51 tanks totally destroyed in the Normandy campaign, with another 80 requiring major repairs. Crew casualties exceeded 50%. But unlike German losses, American losses were replaced. For every Sherman destroyed, 2 arrived from England. For every crew member killed, 3 replacements were in the pipeline. The human cost. The human cost was sobering. Tank warfare in the bocage was particularly brutal. The average distance of tank engagement was 400 meters. At that range, first shot usually meant first kill. Tank crews developed fatalistic humor. The Sherman lights first time, every time, they would joke, referencing Ronson lighter advertisements. But they also knew their sacrifice was enabling victory. Private First Class Wayne Robinson of Company B, 743rd Tank Battalion, would later write about his tank Barbara, "She wasn't the best tank in the world. The Germans had better. But she was there when we needed her. She took us through hell and got us home. That's all you can ask of a tank or a friend." Tactical evolution. The technological evolution continued throughout the campaign. The British Sherman Firefly, mounting a 17-pounder gun capable of penetrating Tiger armor at 1,000 meters, began arriving in significant numbers. By August, 1 in 4 British Shermans was a Firefly. American units received 76 mm armed Shermans starting in July, giving them improved anti-tank capability, though still inferior to German guns. But the greatest innovation remained tactical, not technical. American armor doctrine emphasized combined arms, mobility, and mass. Tanks didn't operate alone but as part of integrated teams including infantry, artillery, engineers, and air support. This systematic approach to warfare proved more decisive than any individual weapon system. German veteran perspective. German tank commander Otto Carius, who destroyed 150 enemy tanks on the Eastern Front, would later write, "The Americans understood something we didn't. War isn't about having the best tank. It's about having enough good tanks, fuel to run them, parts to fix them, and men trained to use them. We had the best tanks. They had everything else." Post-war analysis. Statistical analysis after the war revealed the true story of tank combat in Normandy. The average Sherman in combat was hit 1.2 times. Of those hit, 60% were knocked out permanently, 20% were reparable in the field, and 20% required depot-level maintenance. Crew survival rates were surprisingly high. 75% of Sherman crew members survived their tank being knocked out. This was partly due to the Sherman's large hatches and partly due to American emphasis on crew escape training. German tanks showed different patterns. Panthers hit average 2.3 penetrations before destruction, suggesting they could absorb more damage. But once hit, 80% were permanent losses due to inability to recover and repair vehicles during retreat. Tiger crews had only 45% survival rates when their tanks were destroyed, mainly due to ammunition fires and smaller escape hatches. Lasting legacy. The Normandy campaign transformed American armored warfare. Lessons learned in the bocage would be applied across Europe. Hedgerow cutters evolved into dozer blades. Tank infantry phones became standard equipment. Most importantly, the mythology of German armored superiority was shattered. American tankers learned they could defeat Tigers and Panthers through superior tactics and teamwork. By late August 1944, as Allied forces broke out across France, the strategic impact was clear. Germany had lost not just a battle but the capacity to conduct mobile warfare in the West. The cream of the Panzer forces lay burned out in Normandy fields. Experienced crews who had survived Russia were dead or captured. The training schools in Germany couldn't replace such losses. Criticism and validation. The Sherman tank would continue to be criticized by historians focused on technical specifications. Its armor was thinner than German tanks. Its gun was less powerful. Its gasoline engine was more flammable than diesel alternatives. All these criticisms were valid in isolation. But war isn't fought in isolation. The Sherman was part of a system, industrial, logistical, and tactical, that proved superior to German alternatives. Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, Allied naval commander for D-Day, would later observe, the success at Normandy wasn't due to any single weapon or tactic. It was the culmination of Allied industrial might, logistical superiority, and tactical adaptation. The Sherman tank embodied all these qualities, not perfect, but perfectly adequate for the task at hand. Influence on future doctrine. The long-term impact extended beyond World War II. The Sherman's success validated American military doctrine emphasizing production quantity, mechanical reliability, and tactical flexibility over technical perfection. This philosophy would influence American tank design through the Cold War. The M48 Patton, M60, and even early versions of the M1 Abrams emphasized these same qualities. German military theorist Heinz Guderian, father of Blitzkrieg, would write in his memoirs, "We made the perfect tank. The Americans made the tank that won the war." There's a lesson in that for all military planners. Perfect is the enemy of good enough, especially when good enough can be produced in overwhelming numbers. The Memorial. The memorial at Omaha Beach today includes a preserved Sherman tank from the 743rd Tank Battalion. Its hull still bears scars from German shells. Flowers are regularly placed on it by French civilians who remember the liberation. The memorial's inscription reads, "To those who came in steel coffins to give us freedom." It's a fitting tribute to the citizen soldiers who climbed into inferior tanks and made them superior through courage, innovation, and sacrifice. Conclusion. In the final analysis, the Sherman tank's success at Normandy and beyond wasn't about armor thickness or gun caliber. It was about American industrial capacity producing 1,000 tanks monthly. It was about farm boys from the Midwest maintaining complex machinery under fire. It was about tactical innovation like the Rhino hedgerow cutter that transformed battlefield dynamics overnight. Most fundamentally, it was about the arsenal of democracy proving that quantity has a quality all its own. The numbers tell the story. In June 1944, Germany had approximately 1,500 operational tanks on all fronts. America alone produced 2,000 Shermans that month. By August, Allied forces in Northwest Europe fielded 4,000 tanks. German forces had fewer than 500. The mathematics of modern industrial warfare had rendered tactical superiority irrelevant. The Tiger might win individual battles, but the Sherman had already won the war. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who had argued for positioning Panzer reserves near the beaches, was proven correct in his assessment. In his papers, discovered after his forced suicide in October 1944, he had written, "The Americans will come with thousands of tanks, not better than ours, but thousands. We cannot stop thousands. The war is lost when the first American tank rolls off the beach." On June 6, 1944, at 0629 hours, the first Sherman tanks of Company A, 743rd Tank Battalion, rolled off the beach at Normandy. The war in the West was effectively decided at that moment, though hundreds of thousands would die before its conclusion. The Sherman tank, imperfect, mass-produced, manned by citizen soldiers, had broken the Atlantic Wall and begun the liberation of Europe.